Montana Territory, July 1884. The church doors slammed open with a gust of hot wind, and every head in the tiny town of Willow Creek turned as the bride stood alone at the altar, her white gloves trembling and her veil lifted just enough to show the shock in her eyes. Harriet Juneau had been left. Not 5 minutes before, the preacher had asked if anyone objected. No one spoke, but her intended, a merchant from Butte named Wallace Sims, had leaned in and whispered something no one else could hear. Then he turned, walked straight down the aisle, and out the door. Gone. No explanation. No goodbye. Just boots on wood and Harriet standing there with her heart cracking wide open. The silence in the chapel was thick. The preacher looked confused. The guests whispered, one woman gasped. Harriet's cheeks flushed deep with heat, but she did not cry. She simply turned to the pews, lifted her chin, and walked out the same way Wallace had. Outside, the sun beat down hard. She stood on the edge of the dusty street, her white dress bright as snow against the dry earth, her trunk still tied to the back of the wagon she had arrived in 2 days ago. She heard the voices before she saw them. Poor girl. Came all the way from Kansas City. Mail order bride, I heard. Guess he changed his mind. Serves her right, maybe. Who marries someone she never met? Harriet swallowed hard and kept her back straight. She would not break in front of them. Miss. The voice was low and rough, and she turned to see a tall man standing a few steps away. He wore a simple black coat over a worn blue shirt, his hat shadowing his face. He was not young, not old either, with a strong build and stillness in the way he stood, like he had nothing to prove and no need to hurry. She had seen him once before, yesterday, as she passed the livery. He had not looked at her then. He barely looked at her now. Yes? She asked, her voice steady. My name is Thatcher Sloan, he said. I have a ranch north of town. You need a place to stay. It was not a question. Harriet blinked. I thank you, but I do not think I can offer you my name, he said, quiet but direct. Not just a place. She stared at him. You mean marriage? He nodded once. I do not talk much. I do not expect anything from you but honesty and peace. You need a home. I could use a wife. A dozen thoughts ran through her head. She had just been humiliated in front of the whole town. She had no money, no family left, and nowhere to go. She had crossed 3 states for a man who had not even had the decency to leave a note. And yet, this stranger, this silent, steady rancher, was offering her his name. She looked up at him. You do not even know me. I saw you walk out of that church with your head high, Thatcher said. That is all I needed to know. Harriet's breath caught in her throat. I will not beg, he added and tipped his hat. But the offer stands. She looked toward the church where the guests were slowly filing out, trying not to stare. Then she looked back at Thatcher. All right, she said. Yes. His eyes met hers, then gray and quiet and sure, and he nodded once. We will go see the preacher. They were married an hour later in the same church where she had been left. This time there were no guests but the preacher's wife, and no flowers, no music. Just 2 people standing side by side, saying the words. Thatcher placed a simple gold band on her finger. His hands were rough and warm. Afterward, he helped her into the wagon and tied her trunk beside hers. He did not ask questions. He did not speak much. But he lifted her hand to help her up, and when she settled beside him, he gave her one slow, careful glance. You all right? He asked. Yes, she said. Are you? He gave a short nod and clicked the reins. They rode in silence for the first few miles. The land stretched wide and golden, the mountains rising faint in the west. Thatcher's ranch was set near the edge of the forest. A white house with a stone chimney and a barn behind it. A few cattle dotted the fields, and a windmill creaked in the distance. He helped her down from the wagon and carried her trunk inside. The house was clean and simple, with polished wood floors, a warm stove, and 2 bedrooms. You can take the room on the right, he said. Mine is left. You are welcome in the kitchen, the garden is out back. I ride out early. You will have peace here. I think I will, she said, her voice soft. That night, after she unpacked her things and changed into something simpler, she stood at the window and watched him outside, brushing down his horse in the quiet dusk. He moved slowly, with care, like he had done it 1,000 times. Like he would do it 1,000 more. She went outside and approached the fence. "I can cook," she said. And I will learn about the land if you want." He looked up, surprised. "You do not have to prove anything." "I know," she said, "but I want to." He gave her a long look, then nodded once. "Thank you for today," she added. "You did not have to help me. I did not do much talking," he said, "but I saw someone who deserved better." Her throat tightened and she looked down. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "No," he said simply. She looked up. He was closer now, the fence between them, the sky darkening behind him. "Neither do I," she whispered. He reached out and touched her hand, just lightly, just enough. And that was enough. Inside, she lay in the bed he had made up fresh for her, the sheets smelling of cedar and sun. Outside, the wind rustled the trees. And for the first time in weeks, she slept easy. Not as someone who had been cast aside, but as someone who had been chosen. The rooster cried out before the sun touched the ridge, and Harriet woke to the faint creak of floorboards beyond her door. She lay still for a moment, listening to the house settle into morning. The window had been left open a crack, and the scent of pine drifted in, mingling with the cooler air. She pulled on her wool shawl and stepped into the hallway. Thatcher was already outside, a bucket in one hand, his sleeves rolled to the elbow. She watched from the porch as he passed the barn, his gait even, as if the ground rose to meet each step. A boy of perhaps 12 trailed behind with a shovel and a bent back brim on his hat. Thatcher hadn't mentioned a hand. She waited until they returned. The boy noticed her first and tipped his head. "Ma'am, this is Harriet," Thatcher said without pause. "She lives here now." The boy looked between them, then stuck out his hand, palm still speckled with soil. "Name's Elijah. Been helping out since spring." She took his hand without flinching. "Pleased to meet you. We're mending the north fence today," Thatcher said. "I'll be back before dark." He didn't wait for reply, just hitched the tools in the wagon bed and climbed up, Elijah beside him. They were gone in moments, the rattle of wheels fading down the dirt track. Harriet stood a while longer, then turned and stepped into the kitchen. A pot of beans had been left soaking overnight, and she set them to boil, slicing salt pork and half an onion. There was satisfaction in doing something useful, in filling the house with the scent of food. By midday, she had swept the floors, scrubbed the wash basin, and hung her dresses along the line behind the house. The sun stretched long and bright across the pasture, and the quiet settled around her like a second skin. She found the garden behind the barn, thick with late peas and chard. The rows had been kept clean, but the edges had gone wild, and she knelt to pull the creeping weeds. Her fingers ached after a time, but she didn't stop until the rows looked straight again. A chicken wandered close, eyeing her from under its wing. "You'll have to share the place now," she said aloud. The bird blinked, unimpressed. Later, back inside, she found a drawer of ledgers and receipts near the stove, carefully kept, but months behind. She ran her hand along the pages, noting the neat, narrow script. Thatcher's, likely. She sat at the table and thumbed through the last entries, tracing the list of feed, lumber, nails, and tobacco. By the time the wagon returned, the sun had dipped low on the horizon. Harriet stepped out as they pulled up. Elijah jumped down, arms full of broken rails. "Snapped bad at the creek bend," he said. "Water must have risen last storm." Thatcher set the brake and climbed down, hands streaked with pitch. He nodded at the smell drifting from the open window. "There's cornbread too," Harriet said. They washed at the pump and she handed them each a towel. When they sat to eat, Elijah's eyes widened at the spread. "Didn't know folks made cornbread like this," he said, mouth half full. Thatcher didn't speak, but he reached for a second helping. After supper, Elijah excused himself and rode the mule back to whichever place he called home. Harriet cleared the dishes and Thatcher dried them without needing to be asked. She leaned against the counter, unsure how to bridge the silence. "Was he kin?" "No," Thatcher said. "His pa died last winter. He earns his keep." She nodded. "He's a smart one. Learns fast." She watched the way he folded the cloth, corners aligned. "You keep this place steady." "I try." He set the towel aside. "You did a great deal today." "I didn't want to sit idle." He met her eyes then, not briefly, not in passing, but direct. "You don't seem the idle type." "I'm not sure what type I am anymore." He stepped back, gave her space. "You don't need to decide that now," he said. She didn't answer, but something in her shoulders eased. Later, as she lit the lamp in her room, she found a book on the nightstand, a worn copy of Longfellow. The corners softened with use. She hadn't noticed it before. She opened to the first page. Inside, in faint, careful pencil, was written, "To the one who stays." She didn't know who had written it. Maybe it had always been there. Maybe it hadn't. She read a few lines before bed, the lamplight flickering low. Outside, the wind shifted, and somewhere in the stillness she began to feel less like a visitor. The mornings were colder by late August, the edge of autumn slipping in before the trees had turned. Harriet wrapped a shawl around her shoulders before stepping out to gather eggs. The hens clucked low at her approach, familiar now with her footsteps. She moved carefully, crook of her arm cradling the basket, her boots damp with dew. Thatcher was in the field behind the house, inspecting the irrigation ditch that ran the length of the pasture. He stood with one knee bent at the bank, a spade in hand, the soil dark from yesterday's rain. She waited at the split rail fence until he noticed her. He straightened, nodding once, his eyes scanning her face before dropping to the basket. "The smallest one's gone broody," she said. "Won't budge from the nest." He rested the spade against his shoulder. "Let her be. She'll settle when she's ready." She watched him tighten the strap of his glove. "You always this patient with creatures who don't earn their keep?" "Not always." She smiled, faint and short-lived. "Well, I'm learning." He didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. That evening, as she shelled beans on the porch steps, Elijah rode up with a split lip and a scab forming near his brow. He dismounted slow, favoring one side. Harriet stood. "What happened to you?" "Just a fall," he said, brushing dirt from his sleeve. "Horse stumbled near the gulch." Thatcher emerged from the barn and took one look before jerking his head toward the house. Inside, Elijah hesitated. "You're staying here tonight," Thatcher said. No argument. Inside, Harriet boiled water and found a clean cloth. The boy sat at the table, one hand gripping the edge, the other hovering near his ribs. "Take off your shirt," Thatcher said. Elijah winced but obeyed. A mottled bruise spread across his side, deepening into blue near the bottom edge. Harriet knelt beside him, wringing the cloth. "That wasn't from a fall." The boy looked at the floor. Thatcher could have asked. He didn't. He just turned to the cupboard and pulled down a tin of salve. "Who did this?" Harriet asked quietly. Elijah opened his mouth, then closed it again. Thatcher didn't press. He applied the salve in silence, fingers steady, movements practiced. Afterward, Harriet laid out a blanket on the settee by the hearth. Elijah mumbled a thank you and curled in on himself, already half asleep. Later, after the lamps were out and the coals burned low, Harriet stood at the window in her room, arms crossed tight. The sky was clear, and stars dusted the black above the ridge. A soft knock sounded. She turned. Thatcher stood in the doorway, one hand resting against the frame. "His uncle?" she asked. He nodded once. She stepped closer. "You've known." Watched the boy flinch too many times not to. "But you didn't say anything." "I needed to be sure he'd come on his own." She folded her arms tighter. "And now? I'll keep him here if he wants it." She studied his face. "You didn't hesitate." "I saw too much of myself in him." Her voice softened. "Your people, they didn't treat you right?" He blinked slowly, then looked out toward the field. "There was no one to treat me any way at all." She let the silence stretch. "I think he'll stay," she said. Thatcher nodded. "I hope he does." As he turned to go, she reached out and touched his sleeve. He paused. "You don't have to carry it all on your own," she said. He looked at her hand, then at her. "Neither do you." The words settled between them, quiet and steady. That night, Harriet left her door open a crack, just enough for the light to reach. A week passed without mention of Elijah's uncle, and the boy made no move to leave. He rose with the sun and took to chores as though he'd been born to them. Thatcher didn't comment on the change, but Harriet noticed the way he set aside extra bacon at breakfast or checked the boys' stitches on a split boot sole without being asked. One afternoon, Harriet found Elijah up a ladder nailing a patch of canvas over a warped section of the porch roof. She shaded her eyes. "You planning to fix every board on this place?" He glanced down, sweat streaking the side of his face. "Figured I owed a little back." "You don't," she said, firm. "But if you want to keep hammering, I won't stop you." Inside, she had begun sewing new curtains, cream muslin for the kitchen, something darker for the front room. The house had been well kept, but plainly so, and she wanted it to feel less like a place someone passed through and more like one meant to be stayed in. That evening, after Elijah had gone to bed, Harriet was folding the last of the dry linens when Thatcher stepped inside with a wrapped parcel tucked under his arm. He set it on the table without a word. She paused, towel still in her hands. "What's that?" He untied the string, pushing the brown paper aside. Inside was a bolt of deep green calico, the weave fine, the color rich and even. She blinked at it, then at him. "You bought this?" He nodded once, mouth tugged down like it had cost more than he liked. She reached out, fingers brushing the fabric. "It's beautiful. I thought you might want something that was yours." "I do. I mean, I hadn't expected." She stopped, smoothing the cloth. "You've been making this place better," he said, voice low. "I noticed." Her throat tightened. She folded the towel slowly, then set it aside. "Thank you." He hesitated, then pulled a chair out and sat. His hands rested flat on the table, palms down, the knuckles marked by long years of work. "You still have people back east?" he asked. "No," she said quietly. "My father passed last spring. My sister married a man in Ohio who never liked me much. I wrote her before I came west, but I never heard back." He didn't speak, but he didn't look away either. "I think I came out here hoping someone would want me," she said. "Even if he didn't know me yet. You shouldn't have had to hope for that." She swallowed. "I don't regret coming." Thatcher nodded, slow. "I'm glad you did." The quiet settled again, not heavy but full. She reached across the table and laid her hand over his, warm against the rough grain of his skin. He didn't move, but his fingers curled under hers, careful and sure. The lamp flickered low, and outside, a night bird called once, then went still. She didn't let go. He didn't pull back. And in that stillness, something shifted, not loud, not sudden, but deep. Promise not spoken but understood. September settled in with longer shadows and the scent of dry grass in the wind. Harriet had taken to walking the pasture fence in the evenings, her boots leaving faint tracks in the dust where the cattle had worn the earth bare. She carried a small tin of nails tucked into her apron pocket and a hammer looped through her belt, tapping loose boards back into place one by one, the rhythm of it steadying. One afternoon, she found Thatcher beside the root cellar, sorting through a pile of salvaged hinges and iron handles. A second-hand door leaned against the wall nearby, paint long gone but the wood still solid. "Planning to fix the latch?" she asked. He shook his head. "Replacing the whole thing. Last storm warped it near the base." She crouched beside him, brushing dirt from a hinge. "You think it'll hold through winter?" "It will." He held up a rusted handle, turning it in his palm. "But I'd rather put in something that lasts." She looked at him sideways. "You always think that far ahead?" He set the handle down. "I never used to." He didn't elaborate, and she didn't press. They worked side by side, fitting the new door into place, her hands steady on the wood while he hammered in the last bracket. When it swung closed with a clean thud, he stepped back and wiped his brow. "You ever think about building on?" she asked, surprising herself. Thatcher turned to her, brows drawn faintly. "You mean the house?" "I mean the life," she said. "This place. It's good, but it's still built for someone alone." He studied her, then looked down at the earth between their boots. "I've been thinking on it." She waited. "I've got a claim on the land west of the Pine Ridge," he said after a moment. "Flat enough for planting. If we clear it before frost, we could sow oats in spring." He met her eyes. "If you want to." The wind picked up, tugging at her skirt. "I do." That night, Elijah brought home an old fiddle case, its leather straps frayed, the tuning pegs worn smooth. He set it on the table and opened it like he meant to prove something. "Old man up by the mill said I could have it if I helped him stack his winter wood," he said. "Didn't know if it'd play." Thatcher leaned over, inspecting the instrument. "It'll need new strings. I'll earn them." Elijah straightened jaw set. Harriet stepped to his side. "Do you know how to play?" He shrugged. "Maybe I'll learn." She smiled, not saying more. Later, as the fire settled to embers, Thatcher lingered by the doorway of the kitchen, his gaze drifting between the porch and the boys' room down the hall. "You thinking about tomorrow?" she asked. He nodded. "I'm going to the land office in town. Make it official." She lowered her cup. "You're registering the ridge. And something else," he said. "I want your name on the deed." She blinked. "Thatcher, it's not a favor," he said. "It's yours as much as it's mine. I want it written that way." Her hands tightened around the mug. "No one's ever offered me something that couldn't be taken back." He stepped closer. "Then let this be the first." She didn't speak, just reached for his hand and pressed it to her cheek, her breath warm against his skin. That night, she crossed the hallway barefoot and opened his door without knocking. He stood at the window, moonlight silvering the edge of his jaw. "You were waiting," she said. He turned. "I wasn't sure." "I am," she said. He reached for her, fingers brushing her waist, her spine, the nape of her neck. She leaned into him, steady and certain, the quiet of the room giving way to the deeper hush of belonging. By morning, the ridge was misted in white, a faint frost glinting along the fence rails. Harriet stood beside him as he saddled the mare, her hand on his arm. "I'll have coffee waiting when you're back," she said. He nodded, then paused. "You sure about this?" "I've never been more." He rode out with the sun behind him and her eyes on his back. That winter, they built a second room off the kitchen, wide enough for a piano she'd never owned and a long table with room for more than three. Elijah carved a fiddle bridge from a scrap of maple, and by December, the sound of music joined the creak of the windmill and the call of cattle in the fields. They planted early oats in the spring, Harriet kneeling with her hands in the soil, Thatcher marking rows with a string line and stakes. The earth turned easy under their palms, soft and dark. When the first shoots pushed through, Thatcher came in from the field, dust on his collar, and found her at the sink, sleeves rolled, apron damp. "I sent for something," he said. She turned. "What is it?" He reached into his coat and drew out a folded paper. She opened it carefully. Inside, a certificate from the land office, signed in both their names. Her breath caught. "It's real now." He nodded. "Ours." She stepped into his arms, pressing her palms to his chest. "I never thought I'd have this. A home that doesn't feel borrowed." He rested his forehead against hers. "It's not borrowed. It's built." They stood that way as the light shifted in the window, the scent of tilled soil drifting in. Years passed. The ridge grew green with oats and then corn. Elijah stayed, building his own cabin near the barn, his fiddle music drifting through the dusk like a second heartbeat. He played at their wedding celebration the following summer, a quiet gathering beneath the cottonwoods with a table full of roast chicken and blackberry pie. Harriet wore a dress the color of the first frost. Thatcher took her hand and didn't let go the rest of the night. The house grew fuller. With laughter, with work, with the kind of peace earned slowly, one season at a time. And in the stillness between all those days, in the space where silence met the sound of a shared breath, they loved each other without needing to speak it, because they lived it, because they chose it, and they never stopped choosing.